Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Clay Freeman, VP of Product at Evolve MEP. He has an extensive background in the construction industry, including being the Director of Industrialized Construction at Autodesk in a past life. Welcome to the show, Clay.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to be here.
Well, let's start with how you got into the construction industry and start kind of unpacking your history with it.
Yeah, well, that started like many people in the industry. It was a family business. So my father was a general contractor, and I was doing a lot of labor throughout my childhood out on the construction sites, and eventually moved into the engineering side, and eventually went into tech.
Nice. What made you come to the technology side of it?
It's air conditioned.
Hey, that makes a big difference too.
I certainly enjoyed the site work, but I thought there was so much opportunity to try to do things in a more efficient way. And I was really drawn to technology and processes that could try to make things a little bit smoother on the site.
Yeah, nice. Well, let's start unpacking industrialized construction. And to start the conversation, I'm a big believer in let's define terms, because terms can mean something a little different to everybody. So how do you define industrialized construction?
Yeah, well, to me, it means using techniques that were pioneered by the manufacturing industry over the last several decades, particularly Toyota with the Toyota production system.
Mm-hmm.
I would say specifically one of the most important things is to minimize the number of people involved at the point of final assembly, which for construction is out on the site. We should have less people fighting for space at the site, and we should create higher level assemblies off-site so work can be done in parallel in an environment that is safer and easier for the work to be performed.
Nice. I like that. That's awesome. Why, you mentioned the Toyota example. What about Toyota do you think kind of resonates in construction?
Yeah, I think they really mastered efficient workflow. So much of manufacturing before them was based on a batch and queue type process, where people were trying to increase the efficiency of individual work cells. And Toyota really got a good focus on how to maximize throughput. How much stuff is coming out of that factory at the end of the day for a given investment, including minimizing inventory. So you've got just-in-time delivery, you've got one-piece flow, you've got all these other valuable concepts that they developed.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I want to circle back on one of the other things that you mentioned in your definition too, of having the minimum amount of people on the project site as possible. So to play a little devil's advocate, there's the, well, we've always done it this way mentality. It's worked for us for this long. It will keep on working for us. Why push back and change that of let's kind of scale down and get it as lean and streamlined as possible?
Yeah, and that's a valid question. Change is painful, but you could say that the status quo was working for us thousands of years ago. Any form of innovation created change that disrupted some people, and some people didn't like it. So I think specific about construction is things could be built better at a lower cost. We could have better buildings. It's like so much of what the architect and the owner loves about a design is getting value engineered out, and then projects are coming in over budget, coming in late all the time. It's also a dangerous industry. A lot of people are hurt in this industry. We can address all these types of things by trying to move more of the work offsite.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So where's the best place for somebody to start? They're wanting to go down this road, but they're kind of overwhelmed by the options of industrialized construction.
Yeah, and it's easy to get overwhelmed. Most people start to think, oh, I need this factory with a conveyor belt, and I've got all these really cool robots that's just going to require this tremendous investment. And I would advise most companies to start in a more simple way. I think at the easiest starting point, you're effectively just trying to emulate a site under a roof. And so instead of fabricating an element out on the job site, to try to do it in the shop or even in a tent that is near the site or somewhere off to the side of the construction site, and try to get the work areas elevated at the correct height for work so it can be easier to do. and then get the people off the site. So there's more work that can occur in parallel. So instead of one or two assemblies being fabricated on site, you might have 10 different stations in a site under a roof type concept, creating those assemblies.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, can you speak to some of the different options when doing this journey? So you mentioned that, kind of having the little project site under a tent on it, but then there's the offsite and single trade and multi-trade. Break that all down for me, please.
Yeah. So, I would say evolution along this process occurs on two different paths. So one is going from site construction to site under a roof to more of a real factory environment with a conveyor system. A whole different approach and aspect is to layer in multi-trades. And that's definitely where the biggest ROI can come in over time. Doing an entire riser or a rack. So you've got mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection that is all working together, either under a tent or off in a fabrication environment. That's just eliminating not only a lot of people from the site work, but a lot of trade handovers, which is where most of the inefficiency and problem occurs.
What do you think is really one of the main kind of causing factors of that inefficiency stumble that industrialized construction is able to help overcome?
Yeah, well, I think with site work, you've got a lot of people working in a dangerous environment, and so you've got to be paying attention to those safety issues all the time. You have to work in an awkward position quite often, and if you can work in a more efficient position, not only does that improve quality, but it also improves efficiency. And by spreading it out and doing it off site, you don't have so many people fighting for space. So everybody that's been on the site has seen one trade contractor occupy a location when the other trade contractor is still there, and then you've got crews that are fighting it out to try to get their work done. And if you move that offsite, you can just eliminate so much of that really quickly.
Yeah, really speed up the timelines for it then too.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice. Well, what do you think is a myth or maybe a misconception that people have around industrialized construction?
Well, there's a couple of things that I hear. One is quality problems, and that's generally from people that have a vested interest in trying to protect the status quo. They're just trying to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt that offsite fabrication reduces quality. I'm quite sure that it's the opposite. Things that are built in a controlled shop environment with more efficient work areas, you just have a much better opportunity to produce high quality work.
Right.
The other thing that people think, unfortunately, is that they're going to get instant ROI on the first project, and I think that's a myth as well. You can probably improve the project schedule on your first project, but just the ramp up cost and getting people going generally means that you're not saving money in the short term. It takes time to build up the flow and efficiency to start really getting a big cost savings. You get the schedule savings much earlier on.
Yeah. Well, let's lean into that ROI measure, because I think that's a huge piece, because it can be a pretty big upfront investment. So how do you start to measure that ROI to make sure that you're getting a positive ROI in the end?
Yeah, the first thing is you have to do a fundamental mind shift away from project economics to factory economics. We're used to this industry of project economics. Everything has to pay for itself in the context of an individual project. Whatever you're doing new has got to be mastered and perfected live as you're trying to execute that project. And you're just desperate to try to get cash flow positive and to increase your profitability on that project. With the factory, it's very different. It's terribly inefficient when you're getting things going. And when you start to make ROI is when you've really maximized the throughput of what is going out the door with that factory. Everybody, of course, heard about Tesla and Elon's production hell process, and some of that can occur with industrialized construction as well. It just takes time to get things up and running in an efficient manner, and you have to start shifting your mindset towards this factory economics. I need to maximize throughput from the factory before I start to really make big money from these investments.
Yeah. Well, how do people go about that mindset shift? Because it is a pretty radical shift. And if the kind of the fundamentals of the company are all skewed to the project, how do you convince enough people that that the factory approach is where you need to go?
Well, if you start with a site under a roof type approach, you can just put a few people working over in a protected area of a shop or even in a tent that is off the side of the shop, and start creating some higher order assemblies that can be installed in the job site. That really minimizes the amount of change, and it minimizes the disruption. Lets people to start get comfortable with this process prior to making a really big investment in a full-blown factory.
Mm, nice. Well, if we're thinking through on the change management side of things, what are some of the kind of expectations that people need to have set at the beginning when they're starting this journey?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to be prepared for things to be different. A friend of mine once described what giving a chainsaw to a caveman would have been like. You know, he'd picked it up and he'd whack it against the tree a few times, and when it didn't chop as efficiently as an axe, he would have thrown it away.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that you're using new tools and new processes, and it's fundamentally going to be a little bit inefficient as you get up to speed with that. But when you invest in continuous improvement, you'll start to see some dramatic increases of efficiency that'll just go on and on and on until you're starting to save a huge amount of money. But initially, you should target more reducing the amount of linear processes that are on the site, more parallel processes that can be done off-site, and just reduce the schedule, get some schedule compression out of that. So I think if you go into it with that expectations, you're at a good starting position.
Nice. So are you a fan then of kind of taking that a bite-sized approach of mastering a part of it, getting good at that, and then start building on from there, getting a snowball effect?
I think if you're an existing construction company or a trade contractor, that is undoubtedly the right way to start. You know, startups are being funded all over the place in North America to go straight to the factory approach. But it takes deep pockets. It takes some risk tolerance and a lot of preparation to be successful with jumping straight to the factory mode. If you start with a simple site under a roof type approach, it's much easier for an existing construction business to effectively ingest that.
Yeah, makes total sense. So kind of going back into the manufacturing principles, outside of the efficiency gains, what can construction learn from the manufacturing industry?
Well, I think there's a large number of things. I think focusing on effective labor flow is a big thing. You know, the typical superintendent wants to get the maximum number of people out to the site on the earliest day possible to start any given activity, but they quickly consume the available work, which means the trade contractor, whoever manages those crews, have to bounce that team to another project site. And they're constantly just shifting people from site to site to site. And every time they shift, there's inefficiency in learning the new project, ramping up or ramping down from those projects. If you start with the right number of people on the right day so they can work with continuous flow, that's a huge advantage. So I think the combination of focusing on techniques to improve labor flow, minimize starts and stops, and push more things off-site is three of the key concepts that people should focus on initially.
What do you think is the timeline for this transformation of construction to start really looking more like manufacturing and reaching that critical mass?
Longer than I need to worry about. You know, I think things don't change quickly in this industry. Most of the time when we're brought on board with a project, it's already late, so we have to hit the ground running. We don't have the luxury of a manufacturing company getting to think about a new line or a new production process for 2 or 3 years before it's deployed. And we just got to get things built very quickly. And because of that, and because we don't have that luxury of time for process engineering, we have to be prepared for things to take longer. And so I think this is going to be a multi-decade transition.
Nice. Yeah. You're probably not wrong.
Yeah. Like BIM, I remember BIM was 5 years away for at least 20 years.
Hey, they were right somewhere there.
Yes. Yeah. Eventually it became right.
Nice. One of the things that I find interesting with industrialized construction is that the stories that are being told are most commonly of like these big, huge projects that are kind of, almost one of a kind things that they're really cool stories of how they're all coming together, but they're frankly not really relatable to the average construction firm and how that they would start to implement industrialized construction. And so I think people are trying to be motivating, like, here's the cool stuff that you can do, but it seems a little discouraging because you're like, well, I'm never going to do that. So if that's what industrialized construction is, or prefab, then I'm out because I can't afford that. Well, why do you think the industry is so kind of enamored with those bigger stories instead of making it more relatable to the average
Well,
company?
I think shocking stories always get better press, right? And so that's the ones that get out there the most. But there's a lot of residential housing, the duplexes or quadplexes that are being built with offsite fabrication these days. To some degree, offsite fabrication is occurring on every project, right? You don't see people fabricating a duct elbow out on the site.
Right.
And so we're just taking what's occurring already and we're extending it to slightly higher level assembly. And I think that's occurring on a large number of projects. I see a lot of projects that don't make the news where they are using risers or racks, or they're putting in a bathroom pod. So they're mixing a lot of the traditional in situ techniques with a little bit of offsite fabrication. And it's unfortunate. I just don't see those get as much press.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can help with that.
Working on it. What do you think has more advantage, with the single trade or multi-trade, and where's the complexities in there?
Well, multi-trade is by far where the greatest amount of efficiencies are going to occur, but it's a lot of additional complexity. So if you're a trade contractor that just has a single trade today, partnering with another trade contractor, figuring out the liability of sharing a shop, and all these other things are pretty complex. Or learning to do a new trade as part of your business is complex. Often it takes an acquisition or a merger to really make that happen. But the biggest inefficiency that occurs on the sites, I believe, occurs around trade handoffs. It's getting one trade to completely finish an area and then getting the other trade to occupy it immediately after. If you can pull them together and have them working seamlessly in a shop environment, you reduce quite a few of the trade handoffs on site. And I think that has a tremendous amount of savings. That said, it's easier to start with trying to do some higher order assemblies on single trade stuff because you just don't have that I've got to partner up with somebody else or master a new trade type process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. On the data side of things and looking at the data flow, how should that kind of go throughout the supply chain with industrialized construction?
Yeah, so that's a big thing as well. So let's start with design. It's really hard to take a design that was not built to take advantage of a lot of offsite fabrication and turn it into one that works well with offsite fabrication. So there's a lot of rework there. If the design process has this in mind more from the beginning, it makes it a lot easier. It's particularly good for companies to think about having a kit of parts at the beginning. And I think this is where a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around industrialized construction kicks in when people start talking about a kit of parts. So they start thinking about the post-World War II type of construction that was common in Europe at that time, where people were doing these really ugly cookie cutter buildings, but they were doing them really fast and efficiently because they needed the housing. So that really, I think, got prefab a really bad rep. But you don't have to do that way. Bryden Woods and others doing a tremendous job of showing how you can do nice architecture. Nordic Office of Architecture is another one, doing really nice architecture using prefabricated techniques. So you need to start with this concept of here's this component that I know how to build in the shop in an efficient way. And here's a series of material options that can customize it for the project requirements. If you start with that kit of parts and then you're using that kit of parts during the design process, then that starts to flow very efficiently into the procurement and shop fabrication process. If you don't, then you've got to go back and redo a lot of things. You just never get the same level of efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So one of the things that I hear a lot is the grumbling between the trades and the designers. How do you kind of bridge that gap in that the trades are saying, well, if we're, earlier in the design process, then we would be able to have a more efficient way to prefab. And then the designers are saying, well, we don't really have the kits to be able to assemble that and design it the way that we need to. And so there's this kind of chicken and the egg thing going on here that both sides need to move and meet in the middle, but neither is really there yet. How do you kind of bridge that divide?
You need to first get the right set of partners. You need a set of design firms that is interested in this type of process.
Mhm.
And you need trade contractors and a general contractor that is interested in this type of process. When you have that, whoever starts this can start by creating the kit of parts that is given to the design team to customize and use for the project. Or if the design team initiates it, then they're doing that naturally. I think Bryden Woods has done an amazing job of that. Nordic Office of Architecture was a traditional design firm focusing on a lot of high design architectural projects that became committed to this type of process and started to focus on building out that kit of parts. So if you find the right partner, it's easy. If you don't have the right partner, it's impossible.
Yeah. So how do you find that right partner?
Generally you're going to look for firms that have already started trying to make this transition, already started making the investment, or talk to the firms that you traditionally work with and find which ones have interest in developing the skill set.
Mm-hmm. Oh, how do you keep from overcomplicating the process? That there's so many complexities to it, but that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to get more efficient if we're just going to add more complications to it on the back end.
Yeah, the worst thing in the world is trying to change too much at one time. If you go right off the bat and say, I'm going to do offsite fabrication on almost 100% of the building components, and I'm going to do it in a factory type environment, and we're going to build this kit of parts. And if you do everything at once, you try to eat the elephant in one bite. That's not going to go very well most of the time. We just saw one major company fail last week that tried to do that. If you start more simply, yeah, exactly. So if you start more simply with the side under the roof technique and just try to do a small part of the project, a hospital head wall or an MEP riser or a rack, do 1, 2, maybe 3 different elements with a side under the roof approach, gain a little bit of experience, and then start expanding out from there. That's just so much more digestible.
Yeah, nice. I like that approach a lot. Yeah, I think taking it that one step at a time and building that momentum it gets people excited about it, and it builds the confidence as you're going through it, and you can move a lot faster.
It's hard to do. It's really easy to get excited about this stuff and then try to do too much change at one time. But yeah, you need to try to resist that urge.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk some Evolve MEP. Why'd you decide to come on board with Evolve?
Well, Evolve really looked like the best opportunity for me to work on trying to improve the overall process. So they've got this great customer base of trade contractors creating these detailed models that are fabrication ready. That's just the perfect starting point for enabling the data flow on the rest of the process. It's a great set of smart people that have deep industry expertise. And the combination of those two things just seemed to be the optimum place for me.
Nice. And for those who don't know, can you speak a little bit about who Evolve is?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what Evolve has been focused on most of the last few years is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing trade contractors creating fabrication level Revit models. They create an add-on on top of Revit that makes it much easier to get those models in a fabrication ready state. And now we're starting to expand downstream from that. For example, with the upcoming materials module that'll handle requisitions and receiving materials. But we're not going to stop there. So it's going to go downstream from that.
Nice. And there's a release coming out relatively soon, I believe. Anything exciting to tease in that new release?
There's a lot of new things in the upcoming release. So a lot of improvements to the the modeling for the mechanical and electrical, too many to try to list out right now. But also I think this material product is the first cloud-based product that takes that bill of materials and starts to support more of the process with it. We're all really excited about that.
Nice. And what's something that you wish the industry knew about Evolve MEP?
Well, I think number one, that we exist, and that we're tackling this mechanical, electrical, plumbing problem, but we're not intending to stop there. So we really think that a huge amount of things, a lot of great tools can be created to make this whole fabrication process easier for many different trades in the industry.
Nice. What about the industrialized construction? What do you wish the industry knew that they don't know about IC?
Well, I think the biggest problem most people have is they see it as a binary change, and I wish they could be aware that they could start in a simple side under roof approach with just a small number of elements without significantly disrupting their processes. So it's much easier to dip your toe in the water than what I think most companies believe, and so they've been reticent about getting started. And I think if they became more aware of some of these easy on-ramps to get started and start learning, that a lot more companies would start to get on board.
Yeah. So one of the hesitancies that I've heard is around the, if you really embrace technology and then the factory approach, is that going to have is it going to take people's jobs? Which I don't think is true, but would love to hear your thoughts and comments on that mindset.
Yeah, well, to me, any increase of efficiency has probably affected somebody's job. It's changed the jobs. People do different types of work or more of something because some new efficiency has been created. So that always exists with any type of innovation. But I think if we can start value engineering out the coolest part of the projects, that doesn't reduce the amount of work. You just get a much better product that's more aesthetically pleasing, more functional for the occupants of the building, without decreasing cost at all, without displacing anybody's job.
Yeah. I think it allows people to get more creative too, because you have a little bit, maybe not more free time because you're going to be taking on more work, but you have what you're doing is shifting some. And so you have more bandwidth to cover those creative problem solvings that I think construction is actually really good at. Creative problem solving. I think it takes a hard rap in it of not being that, but I don't think that that's the reality.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. I mean, it's an industry full of creative problem solvers, which is great because there's so many problems out on the site today. If we didn't have all those creative people, we'd be doomed. But the creativity is applied for a discrete problem today. It's like there's a particular problem on a single project, and creative people need to solve it, and they generate some value by doing that. But if instead they could focus that creativity on a systemic type of innovation, something that changes all projects in the portfolio, then the value that creativity is delivering is just orders of magnitude higher.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how do people get a hold of you and find out more information?
Well, you can certainly email me at cfreeman at Evolve MEP, or you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Last question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
To me, innovation just means a continuous effort to try to make things better, more efficient, higher quality, less time. It's just a continuous drive to try to do things in a more efficient way than what you did before.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for joining the show and the conversation, and welcome to Evolve MEP, Clay.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.